Lightroom contains basically the same raw editor as we have in Photoshop, which is Adobe Camera Raw. This is an image, this tower in a churchyard. If we wanted to update, if you need to update, so both in Camera Raw and in Lightroom is some new noise reduction. Go into the development module. One of the new things in Lightroom and in Camera Raw, denoise function, which is an enhanced bit that they've added in, which will go in and try to denoise the image for you. On some images, it works really well, and on others, not so much. It's enhanced. So this is the enhanced one here. So I don't think the enhancing helped us a whole lot on this particular image. Come down in here and look at the noise. I don't see that the noise here was that troublesome to go through the issue on this. Mm-hmm. But if you're going to need to do that, one of the things you might consider doing is using the DxO product, either Pure Raw or the Photo Lab. I use the DxO Pure Raw, which takes and your camera doesn't do anything to the thing other than adjusting the lens corrections and removing the noise. And I think you would agree with me that this is pretty outrageous.
Yeah.
For this trip, I took a traveling camera. I brought a new Canon R10, and of course it can't compete with my big Nikon, my 850. But with this program, I can get incredible quality out of it. That would be a reason for upgrading a program. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I use Lightroom to control where my images are. And I do it through this gallery, which keeps track of the pictures for you, where they're put. And as long as you follow their rules, you don't lose them. So if I go here to Athens on this picture of the Parthenon I'm looking at, I can go to G. So here are a few, and I looked at this one. I kind of thought was the nicer picture of them. So if I want to work on this in Photoshop, I can right click it and I can edit in, and I can go right up here to Photoshop. And what can I do here? Well, this one's not looking very noisy, so I'm not worried about that. But I could sharpen it. And I could use this mask control. We've got these in Photoshop. By hitting down the alternate key on the masking, what I'm doing is telling the sharpening only to work on edges. And the place to look for noise is going to be up here in the sky if I want to really hunt for it. I've got this at 300%, and there is some noise in there. You see it?
Very little.
But very little. At 100%, that's all that's probably going to be seen by anybody. And the answer there is very little. And if you use it to fit screen, heck, I can just make it full screen right now. I just hit the F key. I would imagine that on any of your monitors like mine, I don't see any noise. Do you?
No.
No. So there's no reason to correct it.
Can I ask a question, Richard, while you're in this? I know it's off subject, but can you show me how you would use the tone curve in Lightroom?
So first off, we got the whole picture up there. This is the tone curve. So we've got some various choices in here, but mostly, let's say I wanted to get some more detail in here, some more contrast. I can take the tone curve and I can take the darks and bring them down a little bit. And I can come up with the brights. And because I have a steeper curve here, that's going to give me more contrast. So that's without, that's with. Let's zoom in a little bit. So that's with, that's without. See that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So do you feel like the tone curve is better than just moving the slider up at the top for contrast?
I think that this contrast here is like trying to sculpt with a bulldozer. It's a very coarse tool. See how it's kind of moving, and when you move it, you'll also tend to change your colors. Mm-hmm. Up here, I'd rather see you use texture and clarity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So, did you see it right there? Sharpen up.
Mm-hmm.
and get more contrast. And
Mhm.
so these are like fine or mid-tone contrasts in here. And then if you're really in trouble, you can use the dehaze. See how that brought more contrast in?
Sure.
So those are finer tools. And then if those don't do the job for you, then you can come back over here with the contrast and move it. But it tends to change the color a little bit.
I really like that dehaze slider, but you need to keep it someplace between 5 and 15.
Yeah,
Once in a while, I might go to 20, but yeah.
but hardly ever. I mean, you're right. It's once again, it's a pretty coarse tool, but you can get an awful lot of what you want up here between texture and clarity. So that would be my go-to.
Thank you.
The other thing you can do is you can take and play with your saturation of the colors with your vibrance, which is going to, and by the way, all this is in camera raw too, which is why I'm showing it to you here. But then you can adjust that by bringing down the saturation to help do the fine adjust, kind of use the tools, not as Adobe intended, but creatively. So that's the tone curve. I think, and you can do it with the various colors. And the nice thing here is you can see it. This will change the color tone. So if you want to make this more red, you could, in the color thing, you raise that up. See how it got red? Or you can bring it down to make it more green. Or you can change. I can do this here. You can change the balance. You can make it neutral. You can also make it just go back to a linear, right, which is what we had here. It has some presets in it that gives you some various contrast levels. So that works in there. So it's a very powerful tool. So you can change.
And you would probably use this more in Photoshop than you would
I
in
would,
Lightroom.
yeah. If I'm going to start playing on that level, I like to go to Photoshop because I have more control. I mean, I'm getting lots and lots of control with Lightroom as I go along, but this does it pretty well.
You done anything with the new point color tool?
The one that's
Which
right
I
here?
don't understand.
Right there, you're right.
Okay, well let's do that. Let's say that I'm looking at this and I think that that blue is more intense than I remember. So I'll click on this tool and I'm going to click on the sky here. So now I have a palette down here which gives me those blues, and I can then move that color. So I'll take this and I'm going to make it light. This I remember being more like that. So I can move just those colors there that did not affect the other colors in the photograph. Okay, so this is what it was. This is what I made it. I could also then go back to where it was here, and I could just move the saturation. Now, saturation is an up and down. See it? See the slider move?
Mm-hmm.
So I can do it with the pointer, or I can do it with the slider. So I can say, I think the color was probably right, but it was too saturated. And then I can do the same thing with the luminance here. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to do the luminance shift. And that's that slider on the side. See it? So I want to make it night. I want to make it bright day. So that's what that does. So I've done this one. Okay, I made that color there. I'm going to click on my thing. I'm going to come down here on the rock, on this pole, bango. So that's in the yellow oranges. And I think what I want to do is make that maybe more yellow. You see the rock change?
Yes.
There, made it more red. So I've made that more red. Now
I have a question.
I'm sorry?
I had a question.
Let me just finish with one more color here.
Yep.
Click on the tree. Tree's green. I want to make the tree a different color green. And see the sliders moving as I'm moving the thing back and forth?
Didn't see the tree turn.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
There was another question going there.
Yeah. So like the stone color, if you picked a stone color, and then you had the graphic, but it didn't give you like the entire palette of colors. It was only a certain range.
Well, then that's what this tool does, as opposed to some of the other tools we've got that you can use. Color grading would probably be the one to do that with.
Oh, I see.
as I understand, I mean, this is a tool that we're all just beginning to learn about. And if you're, if you're addicted to the YouTubes, everybody and their brother is putting something out on how to use this sucker. This range, let's see if I can go back. This range ticket down here should give you that control to have it go between more things.
Okay. Yeah.
Without on.
Okay.
All right, now, which brings us over here. This is the thing, a neat tool to use in here is that you have this history panel. The first thing is at the bottom. The thing you did last is up here on top, and you can just step back through it to get to where you were before. And that does not disappear, unlike the history panel in Photoshop. So, you can work on this thing for a month, and these commands will all be there to allow you to undo them. So there's our point curve.
Richard, is that color mixer a new addition to the program?
Yes. No, color mixer's simply been renamed.
I'm sorry?
It's been renamed. So mostly it has this new panel here here's the mixer. Remember seeing that one?
Yeah, I have that one.
Okay, so the new one is the point color that they've added to it.
But I don't have the color mixer.
Okay, so what version of Lightroom are you running?
Let's see. I have 15.0, 15.5.
Okay. Yeah, so this is the latest one. It came out not very long ago.
Came out on the 10th, just as Adobe Max was opening.
Okay, this has been around for a while. But yes, that's a new one. The lens correction in Adobe, I mean, yeah, in Lightroom is good, but it's a reverse engineering, which is not as sophisticated as the lens correction in the DxO programs. But if you're not using that, I recommend that you always have remove aberrations and enable corrections. And it'll try and find the camera you used and the lens you used and make adjustments for known discrepancies or errors in the lens. If we were going to take this into Photoshop, you click here to edit in, and then all of the programs that I can edit it in are pretty much listed here. I can go right into Photoshop, but if you're going to do a lot of work with it, I'm going to suggest that you open it in Photoshop as a smart object. So what happens now is Lightroom makes a copy of the image, and then it sends it into Photoshop as a smart object, which means if you click on the smart object here, that takes you back into Camera Raw. So here we are in Camera Raw. So I'm now in Camera Raw again, so I can come back in here and adjust that further. So let's say I want to take down the dehaze a little bit, and maybe I want to make the thing a little bit warmer. Okay, so I've done this in the Camera Raw file, just like I had imported it in from Lightroom. So I click OK, and it puts it back in there, and that has not messed up that program at all, which is a pretty neat feature. So one of the things I talked about was doing some adjustments in Light by making a second copy of your raw file, of your Camera Raw file. If you right click on the window part here and come down here, and you've got new smart object via copy, and click on that, it makes another smart raw copy that you can go back into the raw editor and fix, but it's independent of the one that's down here. So let me go back and do this again. I'm going to click on this, and what I'm going to do for this one, oh heck, let's make it black and white. So it's a black and white picture now. I click OK. So this one's black and white, and that one's in color. So they were independent of each other. If I took the original image here and I duplicated the layer, so now I've got another raw image here. I'm going to go ahead and do the same one with this one. I'm going to click on this one, and I'm going to turn this one into a black and white. Click OK. Notice that both of these are black and whites. That's because these two are in fact the same raw image that it's editing. Whereas this one and the bottom one are two different ones. Now I talked to you about the history panel. This is your history command, and I can undo things in here as many steps as I want and then start afresh. Problem with this history panel is that when I save this drawing and go to something else, it's lost. It is not a permanent addition to the program. Everybody got that?
Yes.
Okay. Now, so I've got this picture here, and I want to somehow do something. Let's say what I want to do is to have the sky be black and white. Here on my original image, I'm going to come up to filter, and I'm sorry, up to select, and I'm going to come down here to sky. So it is now selected the sky. See the marching ants? All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on this layer up in here, and I'm going to put a mask on there. And because I've selected it, it has put a black thing over the bottom, which says don't do the effect here, and it's put a white mask over the top part. I'm holding down the Alt or Option key, clicking on the mask so you can see it. So now my gray sky is showing up in here, but it's not showing up on the rock or the buildings. What's wrong with this mask? Anybody?
In between the columns.
Yeah.
In between the columns. That's right. So now we can go in and we can edit the mask. So I can click on the mask, what I did here, see the little box around it to show that I'm editing it. And then I can come in here. What I want to do is I want to make these parts white. So there's the white colors down here. That means it'll reveal. I can take a brush. I'm going to use my bracket key to make it bigger. And then I'm just going to see it come back. I have the gray one there now. Maybe I should go
Yes,
bigger.
I can see it.
Okay. So the bigger you are, obviously, the more you can do that. And so you can freehand it if you're brave, or you can use a selection tool like the quick selection tool. That's this one here. Like, see, I've got it down, and with it, I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. You tell it to pick all the things like it. See how it made the selection there for me? Now I can take my brush tool, and I can just brush that in, and that cleaned that up very nicely. So that's a mask, and that's the use of a layer. All right, did that make some sense?
Yes.
So 100% is where we check to look at sharpening and selections, because that's where we get the most realistic information about what's happening in our photograph. And then full screen gives us our whole picture as it is. All right, so I've worked on that. So now the problem is,
now that we've done, we want to save this. And if you recall, we opened this from Lightroom as a copy. So Lightroom made a copy of the image, and we're working on that. And when we save it, it'll go back to that place, File, and you hit Save. There is a temptation, however, to hit Save As. So let's make a change here that we can be sure that we could see. Let's do something funky with the sky. A solid color, and that's kind of different enough. Say OK. Come back on this color fill, lower the opacity, because we just want to get a little bit of a different haze in there. And then let's copy this mask. So now we have kind of a different sky. I'm going to take this new image here, and rather than save it, I'm going to do a save as. Save as. And I'm just going to do this as a new name. And, well, let's leave it in the same folder. So, save. and it's not here in Lightroom. What's happened is because it saved that as a different name, it didn't replace the one that we had before. Let's go up here to library, synchronize, and here it shows we have it to the synchronization button, and it found the images that I had saved while we were doing this work. So I'll just go ahead and import them. Up, and there it is. It's brought it back in. We can use that to our advantage as a sorting technique. So we'll take a look at that.
Is there any way you can review how you went and changed the color of the sky?
Yeah, I mean, you want to do sky replacement?
Right. Do the black and white.
What I'm going to do is this is a different picture in Athens. This is the hill where they got most of the materials to build that sucker. So I'm going to edit in.
Smart object.
You do it as a smart object, give yourselves some grace. But because I hadn't done any editing on this thing, it would have opened up in Camera Raw. All right, so here I am. And what do I want to do? I want to replace the sky, right? So probably the next thing I ought to do is find a sky. There's a good sky, you think?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to edit in. I'm going to just take this one up into Photoshop. All right, so there's a sky. What I'm going to do now is select all, and I'm going to take this move tool here, grab the sky, and I'm going to hover it over the picture that we were working on in Athens. And while holding down my mouse, I'm going to drag it in. And the sky was now put into this file. So there's our image. There's the sky that I want to put in the image. So I'm going to click on this, select sky. So, and let's do that up here at select. I just came down to sky. And it makes a selection. Now let's look and see. So there's the selection. And what I'm going to do with this turn down like this is I'm going to come down here. And this button down here makes a mask. So I'm going to click on this layer here. The selection is already in place. I'm going to click on the mask. So what the mask did is it buried the ground in front and hit it with this black, and then let the picture of the sky I had on top show through. Now I'm on the picture of the sky. I'm going to turn off that little chain so I can move them independently, and I'm going to move the sky. See it? So I can now put the sky where I want it to be, or whichever cloud functions that I wanted it to have. Now let's take a look and see what that mask looks like. If I hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the mask, this is the mask it made for the sky. So the part that it knew wasn't sky, it made black. The part that it thought was sky, it made white. And then it did a transition between to make it fit in and flow nicely. Do you see that?
Did a pretty good job.
Now, let's say that I knew I was going to blow this thing up really, really huge because somebody was going to pay to have it printed. And I didn't want these buildings to look like they were on the sky part. I can click on my mask. I can change my color to black. This little button here. That's the black domino. I can take my select. I'm going to select all. And then I'm going to take my brush, use the bracket keys to make it bigger. And now, see how I'm painting out those buildings? So now I just went in and I adjusted my mask to hide those buildings. But I want that hill back there to fade. That's kind of a nice artistic effect. And by the way, masks do not have to be perfect. They just have to be good enough to make the illusion work. Okay, I'll click back on this. So now I've done that. These buildings do not have any intrusion of the sky. Well, let's say that I wanted it to be a nighttime sky. So I'm looking here at the sky layer. That's what I'm on. I'm going to come down here to the solid color. I'm going to make it, I'm going to make it kind of pinky orange-ish. No, maybe that kind of goes. I picked a color here. It's up here on top. I'm going to move the opacity down because I just want a bit of the glow on the sky to make it like a sunset, but it's making everything oranged out, right? So what I can do is I hit the Alt key and I can hold it between the two layers and say, only take this information and attach it to the layer directly below it. So now my sky has a red tint, but my buildings and my ruins do not. So that color's stupid. Let me double click on the color here and let me make it instead another color, maybe that's kind of looks like a storm, doesn't it? So say, okay, so now I've changed the color of my sky background. Well, I don't like that at all. I like the sky that came there first, and there it is. Well, maybe I want to make it more moody. Let me click back on this. Let me go down here to these, and let me hit a curves adjustment. And I'm just going to darken the sky a little bit. Maybe I should lighten the white parts and maybe darken the blacks.
Maybe.
Okay, so now I've changed the tenor of the tones. I got the scope here. Let's say I want to put it in there and give it more texture. Come back down here to these again, and I can use brightness and contrast. Click on that, and let's up the contrast. Lower the brightness. And these are all only going to affect this layer down here because they're attached.
So was that because when you started doing these adjustments, it's where the layer was highlighted, it says okay, apply below. Had you done an adjustment layer at a different position below,
yep,
on the black and white or something, you would still have to go back and do that trick where you make it go.
Well, I've done the trick to pick the sky down here.
Right.
So all these are adjustments to that layer. If I don't want them to be on this layer, let's say I'm doing something else. I'm going to click Option and hold, and I'm going to click here. So that made them all the way up because
right. So that's how you turn it. But that toggle that would affect all the ones that you had done that to.
Yeah. Well, let's undo that for a second. Click here. So now they're all toggled. Let's say I'm just going to toggle the green color up here.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to hold down the Alt and I'm going to put it between those. So that turned it off, but these two are still attached.
Got it.
Okay. Now, another way to skinny this cat is I could take the three of these and I can make them a group. Click. Group layers. So now they're all a group. And I can take this group, but I can then adjust it as a mass. That's way, and that's, by the way, why I like to use Lightroom, because as long as I follow its rules, I can always find the image. If I start putting it wherever the spirit moves me, my chances of losing it are much, much better. That's enforcing discipline on myself. You know, I'm the kind of guy who've left to his own devices. My dresser would look like my desk does, piles everywhere. Even my filing cabinets are piles everywhere. I have no idea which file's which. I have to go through them all to find things. So this imposes an order on me. You know, it makes me do it.
Do you just have one catalog, Richard, in Lightroom?
The answer used to be yes, but I'm in the midst of changing to a larger SSD drive. So I'm building it slowly so I don't overwhelm myself. What I did decide to do is that I have a bunch of images that I use when I'm teaching or writing articles and stuff like that was interspersed with all of my pictures. And I put them in their own catalog because they're a whole different thing. But all of my images, the goal is to have them all in one catalog. Okay.
Can I ask what type of storage system you're using? Because I'm going through that myself with these, 7 hard drives that I have.
Yeah. You might want to look at a place called OWC, Other World Computing, and another company to look at. I found a company called CRUCIAL, and they make, this is one of their hard drives. Malon introduced this when he was giving a talk about how he runs stuff off his phone. I've got a 2 terabyte and I've got a 4 terabyte one of these, which I use for traveling. When I bought my new Mac with all the bells and whistles I couldn't afford, I went to the OWC and got from them a 8 terabyte RAID system that plugs into my computer. So with 8 terabytes, I shouldn't run out of space until next week. And so when I'm traveling, I don't carry the big one. I carry a couple of these. One that has a nuts and bolts Lightroom program on it, just so I can put the pictures in whilst I'm taking them, see what I've got, and make my second copy. I take the other one and I plug it in, and I have Lightroom automatically back up my files to that other drive by date. So when I'm importing them in, it makes my backup copy and it puts it into Lightroom copy. Now I have 2 copies and the card. So on my trip, I have 3 copies, and it took up no space. It's not like this was going to break the bank. And they're better. They're supposed to be able to drop 6 feet onto carpet and underwater for a couple of hours. And if I'm sweating that much, I don't deserve the pictures.
Just FYI, if you belong to Costco, they're putting the Samsung T7 2 terabyte SSD on sale, I think November 1st for $99.
Good price.
I saw that.
And
I saw that.
And that's basically how I got my smaller ones. And that makes all the sense in the world. So if you're going to buy a big one, I would go with the OWC, although this company that I just gave you is supposed to be coming out with an 8 terabyte, but right now 4 is the biggest one they make. But that solves that problem. And so when I go into Lightroom, I have that button. You automatically copy when you're importing them in, and I just have them going to one of those hard drives, that I plug in for that occasion. And then when I'm done importing things in, I unplug it and throw it in the drawer. So I got my suspenders. And then of course, I also use an online backup system called Backblaze. So by the time I get back into the world, I've got 4 plus the card. I got 5 copies, and then I can start erasing things without feeling bad about it.
Thank you for that information, Richard. I appreciate it.
All right. So what I'd like to do now is show you an image that does a lot of these tricks, and another alternative. When I've got an image that I know I'm going to do a lot of work on, rather than trying to make multiple copies and keep them in Lightroom, because that confuses Lightroom, what I do is I make a folder somewhere else, and I load those images from Lightroom. I do my first stuff in Photoshop. I save it back to Lightroom, and then I take it and do a save as, like we just did before, which is how I know that normally it doesn't go back into Lightroom, but we'll figure out what happened there. So I'm going to go back in and show you how that stuff works, okay? And then we're going to start working on an image. If I've gone way over your head, just stop. Some of it will become clear. And if I repeat it enough times, some of it will get through. I'm going to go over here to the big hard drive that I told you I just got. And this is what all it's got on it. It's got the RAID that makes it work. It's got the Lightroom catalog that I'm now using. And it has a folder called Evolving Image Studio. So if I've got a big project, after I've brought it in from Lightroom into Photoshop, and I've saved whatever I've done back into Lightroom, then I'll do a save as, and I'll put it in a folder. So in here, I've got a folder called Boat Builder. So I click on that, and in here, I've got some assets, and I've got the Photoshop drawing that I built it on. So let's see, we got a JPEG here. What's this JPEG? This JPEG is the original picture that I was sent. The guy liked it, but there was something wrong with it, didn't know how to fix it. So we can look at it and say, we don't like this dunce cap on his head. This shadow here is kind of funky. His arm kind of looks like maybe he's doing something wonky and is way too thick here. There's some problems here with the separation between him and the building in the back. So that was the initial image that came in.
So Richard, when you save them into this folder, then you open them back up when you want to work on them again. Is that what
Yeah,
you're
while
doing?
I'm doing this process, I'll save them in this folder. So I've got all the assets together.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I get it down to what I think is a finished place, I'll take that image and I'll import it back into Lightroom. So I've got the image that it started out with and where I got it to. And then if I think I might come back, I'll save all these steps. And if I don't think I'll come back, I won't. This is the image that came back. It started out as a JPEG. I brought it in as a raw, and I did it as a smart object. You see it down here. I can click on this and get back to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I'm going to. So this is what I was given. This is what I made.
Cool.
Okay, so that's what that is. So there's a process there. And it's part 1 and part 2 because there's a lot of steps because I want to try and show you a lot of things.
Funny hat.
Well, it reminded me what I was doing, right? So what I did here, I've got this smart object, and I've got that as a safety net, but I'm pretty well happy with what I did there. So what I will usually do is I will make a copy of that smart object, and then I will rasterize it. Okay, so these two are the same, except I'm not carrying the overhead while I'm working of the smart object. Okay? So let's split the screen. So there he is. And I like to work on the idea of starting with what bothers me the most or what bothered the client the most, the fellow who took this picture. And the first complaint was the shadow across his shirt. This shadow here and this shadow up in here. The first thing I did is I lightened it. We've done this before. I made a curve and I just pushed the whole curve up to lighten it. And then I used a mask. Let me turn the mask off. To turn the mask off, you click Shift and click on the mask. So the mask is off. Notice his shirt got darker because of the curve. When you do the curves, you adjust the color. Now we could change that by putting it in the color mode up in here, but we don't need to because I want it to be darker anyway. So that got rid of this shadow in here, and the next shadow is darkening. See how it's lighter here? So I wanted to cut the difference. What did I do here? I did a darkening curve. I just brought it down a little bit, and then I used a mask, and this mask is gray. This mask is gray because I only want to do a little bit. I built it up a little bit at a time. So I took a brush and I put the opacity or the opacity of the brush down, and I just went over it a little bit of a time until I lightened up that shadow. So that's what's going on there. See it? It darkened the target on top so it doesn't stand out. So that fixed the shirt. This kind of raccoon eye here bothered me. So I did the same process. I used a curve and I used a mask. So let's look at the mask first. This is the mask. It's only on the eyes. And one eye needed more light than the other. That's why one is whiter and the other one is more gray. And I used this targeting adjustment tool here. I laid it over the eye and I moved it up a little bit. That's what these two spots are. That's where the darkness in the eye is. So that took care of the eye shadow. As you look in the back, what I wanted to do was make the back less important, and I did that by darkening it. So how did I darken it? Start out with the layer we're on here. We're going to make a new curves layer, and then I'm going to darken it. Now, the nice thing about doing an adjustment layer, I messed that up. I can just get rid of it. I simply delete the layer. And then I'll come back and just add another curves adjustment layer in here. So curves. And this time, what I think I'll do is I'll just kind of hit the middle and darken the background. So that made this part less important but it also darkened him. So what I want to do is not have it affect him. Select subject. Okay, it selected the subject. And actually, it looks like it did a pretty good job, don't you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good enough for
Really
government
good.
work. So I'm going to take this mask, I'm going to delete that mask, and then I'm just going to put a new mask on. And the new mask had my darkening effect on him, but not on the background. That's exactly the opposite of what I wanted. So with my cursor on the mask, I'm going to hit down Control or Command, depending which one you are, and the letter I, and that switches them. So now the effect of darkening the background is only on the background, and he is protected with this mask. Next thing, what did I do here? Here, I came in and just added a little bit of more contrast, and I did it to everything. So that's why the mask is empty. But all of these adjustment areas are carrying very little overhead. They're not making my files much bigger at all. So the next step is to go into a curve. What's the curve doing? It's doing some more sharpening, getting a little bit of an S curve. That is, say it's darkening, lowering the darks, raising the brights, and gives us a little steeper here. That gives us more contrast. So far, so good?
Yes.
Now what we're going to do is bring in the sky. And we're going to do this just exactly the same way we did on the last one. So let's click on this. There's the sky. We'll hold down the Alt key and click on that so you can see it. So there's the sky. And I did a sky mask on it. And if you notice here on the sky one here, that I brought the opacity down. So let me just turn these back on. So it was here. So there it is. I thought that was a little intense. You know, neat, but a little intense. So this depends what kind of a mood I want. And I decided that I wanted it to be more subtle. Although, looking at it now, I might make it a little bit stronger. So that's what happened here. I made the sky. And here I added some more. Let's click on it again so you can see. I made these mid-tones steeper to get more drama in there. And then often when I'm doing these kinds of things, I'll just make a black and white adjustment layer so I can see what's going on better. So that's it. This is simply a black and white adjustment layer thing with no particular adjustments. You got some presets in there, and I just picked one that gave me a feeling for what I thought I want. But what happened here, when I looked at this, is that I felt in here that I wanted the image to be a little bit darker so I could see what was going on. See, I had this light problem in here I wanted to fix, so that pointed that out. So that's the process on the first set. And by the way, I could have let it live right here. I could have made it go. But notice how with the black and white, how this arm now feels very strange, is I saved this image to this point, and File, Save As, and now it's going to go into my boat builder file, and it'll be part one, but this is PUG, so I save it. And now what I'm going to do.
I have a question.
Yep.
So as you're going through and you're making the adjustments and you were talking about the overhead,
Right.
And obviously you have the potential for making a huge file. Is there any way that you can display as you're going along that's like, oh, it's time to do something?
Well, a lot of it depends on the resources you've got. If you're dealing,
Like the size of it's down there, right?
yeah, I'm just right clicking on the size down here in the bottom.
Oh, okay.
And it's giving me information about the image right there.
Right, but it's not like.
And that's at the current space?
Yeah, that's the one here because I haven't changed anything. See, I clicked on that right arrow there, and I can click down here on
okay.
document size, click here.
Right.
So now it's saying that this document here And this is how big it is right there.
Right. So you can kind of keep a
You
eye
can.
on the tank as you go.
But because this I know this is going to get to be huge. I said I don't need all this stuff. I'm my basic image here is working pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the black and white, and then I'm going to do a Command Shift Alternate and the letter E. We've done that a whole bunch of times, and I've made a stamp visible here. And then I'm going to go from here down to getting rid of the funny hat. I'll leave my, why did it? Well, normally I would leave the thing to get rid of this, but I've got that. And then I would save this now, File, Save As, goes back into the same thing. So this now will become Part 2. And I would save it. Just so I can get all my steps back together, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, so there's the bolt putter. I'm going to get rid of the sky. I don't need that anymore. I don't need that one anymore. So there it is. And what I'm going to do now is, there is our stamp visible that came from the other image. And now I begin again. So what am I going to do here? I'm going to go back here. I created a copy of this, a new stamp visible, and then I made it into a camera raw file, and I made some adjustments in camera raw. And the adjustment I made here is I stuck in and moved his arm in. See that? Everybody?
Yes. How did you do that?
Well, you can do it a couple of ways. One of the choices you've got up in here is geometry. You could move it around in geometry to try and bring it in.
Yep.
Another way to do it is to the liquefy tool. Or you can come into edit and use the transform tool and use a distort, which is what I think I actually did on this picture. We take distort, and then we can take that arm and move it in. See it?
Yep.
And that makes the hands look about the right size. So, it makes the shoulders look about right. So that probably is a pretty straightforward way to get that arm back into where we want it to be. And then looking at this thing, I found this part here distracting. So what I did here is I just did an erase command to try and remove the post. And that's using the erase tool, which you have to do on a layer normally. So if you use the erase tool, it really is pretty marvelous. If you come down in here, look at that pole. You need to be on. Now, when I'm doing a lot of these things, is I'll make a temp layer, which is what you're seeing up here, but I've got a stamp visible here. To use the erase tool, you have to be on a pixel layer. So you come up here, there's the remove tool right here. And if you just paint it, it'll basically try and erase it for you. And it oftentimes doesn't. I've got it on below, don't I? So that'll do it, or you can use, I think on this one, I ended up using a clone stamp tool to get rid of it because I wasn't liking how it went. So that's what happened here. And then I looked at the face, and what I did here is I wanted some more texture. So how did I get the texture? Let's look in here a little bit. Is I made a stamp visible, and then so let's do that. Go down to here, a stamp visible. I'm going to take that stamp visible, edit, and I'm going to adjustments. I'm going to desaturate it, and I'm going to take filter, and I'm going to use other, and I'm going to use high pass. And what I want to do in high pass now is make his face and some of these textures in it more pronounced. And you can see it here. So just bring it in and you move it around until you get the amount that you want. If we're doing this with a lady or a child, we want to be very, very subtle. If we're doing it with a clean shaven kind of a guy, maybe middling. If we want to make an old character actor, we want those scars and those lines and that stubble to really show up. So we make that okay. And then what are we going to do? We want to change its blend mode. And remember, you can just run your cursor down the blend modes to see what they look like. In this one, overlay, soft light, a little gentler, hard light. Let's look at overlay, soft light, hard light. Can you see the difference between those two?
A little bit.
All right. Vibrant light. Can you see that one?
Yes.
All right. So you decide how rough you want him to be. So let's make him vibrant light. And then you have to decide. And by the way, now that you've done that, you can mask that out, but you can also then change, put a mask on it. I did it harder there. I did vivid light, opacity. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put a mask on it. Let's go see so we can see it all. We're going to click on this. Screen. We're going to look at this. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key, click on the mask control, which gives me a black mask, which means it took away what I did. I'm going to come in here and look at him. And then I'm going to use a white brush. I'll use the bracket key to make it bigger. I could also come up here and make it bigger here. And some of you can set your mouse to do it. I don't particularly care for that, so I don't. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make his face, get that extra detail, and his hair, but not his, I might do his neck, but not his shirt. And I don't want to go too far into the other. So now he's a grislier character.
And Richard, don't you dare do that to me ever.
Well, for you, I promise.
I'm watching you.
I go the other direction. With people I like, you know, they
I'm
have less wrinkles
scandalized.
and they lose weight.
I'm scandalized here.
So that's the one I chose, and I think we have more character in it. But the fellow wanted it to be a black and white image. So let's go back up here. And there's lots of ways to do black and white. One is to come down here with your adjustment layers, and there's one called black and white. I'm not a big fan of that. What I think works much better is to use a gradient map. So let's click this layer on. And what we're going to do, bring this up here. What I'm going to do is down in my adjustment layers, we have something special called a gradient map. It's down here next to the bottom. When we click on that, a gradient map puts whatever our colors are going to be, and it puts it in their places by the tone. So in this case, because it was set before to red, it made the darkest tones red and the lightest tones white. But I probably want this to be a black and white. So if I double click, and we have some perceptual things. So we got perceptual, linear, and classic. And normally when I'm doing this kind of work, I prefer perceptual or classic, and classic normally because I think it gives me a better breakdown from my darks to lights. If I double click on this map, I get this piece down in here, and I can now change the colors. If I click on this red on the far stop, I can click on the color map here, and I can make it black. So now I have black. I'm going to click on this one over on this side, click on the color. I'm going to make it white. So now I have a black and white. So there's my black. I can take my middle point here and I can move it down. So I can change my black and white tones here based on the tones in the image. So you can get a pretty nice image in here this way. If you don't like where something is, you can just throw it away, gone. Click back on, and I can move this around.
Wow.
Okay, so I've got a black there. And then what I can do is underneath that, back here, is I can use then the black and white adjustment layer that came from down here. And in it, I can now move the colors to see where their tones are. So there I move the red, see the red? Can you see how it works in the picture now?
I don't see
A little
much
bit.
change.
Well, I've already, now, okay, now this has to do with, I'm going to put the gradient on top and the black and white on the bottom.
There you
Yeah, that does.
Okay, so now I can once again fine tune, because I'm using these two together. See in the background how things are changing?
go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There. So now magenta shouldn't really do anything. Oh, it does. Look at his shirt. See the corner of the shirt?
Mm-hmm.
So I can decide what I want that to look like. So now I've done a black and white. And the other thing that oftentimes will work when you're doing a black and white image is to add a grain. What is grain? Anybody?
Noise.
Grain is noise. And I gave you all before an action for making grain.
Unless you go back into the 1960s and you're developing triacs and you're pushing it, you've got clumps of silver halide.
Yeah. Well, that's what the grain action here does when it goes in. So there's grain right here. And what I've done when I made this is I have two grains. I've got a coarse grain. So let's turn the grain off. You see the grain come in?
Yeah.
Look right in here. So that's made
Mhm.
up of two different kinds of grain. We've got a coarse grain. See that one? It's the larger bumps. That would be for your bigger pieces of silver. And then you got a fine grain. See it there?
Yes.
I'll pop it up a little bit bigger there. So no grain, fine grain, and then fine grain with coarse grain. So that emulates, to my mind, film. And there's all kinds, you can see it really good over here. So no grain, grain, no grain, grain.
I attended the last AI user group, and there's people in there talking about things that I didn't know or understand at all. But they're using some software that says, I want this to make like it's an Ansel Adams picture, and they just click on it and it does it.
Yeah. And you can
Yeah.
buy actions. I mean, that Surge guys, he'll send you an action that does that too.
A little bit ago, when you were adjusting the sliders and the guy was really dark, I thought, oh, that's kind of neat. And it reminded me a lady named Liz Mosley at Adobe Max a week ago, well, on the 10th of October to be exact. She commented, her session was called Grow Your Brand with Adobe Express, but she made the comment is, how do I want people to feel?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, while you were moving those sliders around, there were lots of good pictures there, depending on what you wanted to accomplish. I saw at least a half a dozen good pictures, but they were all different.
I would agree with you. And by the way, once you get the grain in here, you can use your opacity to lighten it or make it stronger. So, and you're right. You do that when we do a color adjusting thing, we do the same thing. Do we want the color to evoke a certain emotion or what you remembered? All right, so the next problem, I looked at this baby and I have a preset that I could share with you if you'd all like, and it's where I made the image look platinum. You can buy plugins that do that, but you can also do it with a curve. And so I have a curve. You can see the adjustment right in here. So I have some ones that I've developed up for, like there's a silver one. if you like that kind of a look on a black and white, the platinum one here, which I kind of like. So now I've given it an old-timey feeling. So that's what that one's doing. And then I came back and look at this thing and said, you know, the problem here is that I've got him there, but what's the picture about? Is the picture about that boat on the bottom?
No, it's about him.
The picture's about him. So what I want to do is somehow focus in on him. And you can do that by sizing. And one of the tricks to doing that now is you can take and make a series of black colors here. Let me just start back here. So I made a black mask, and I made a black color. I go down here to my adjustment layers, a solid color, and I made a black layer. So I put a mask over it and said, well, there's an image. I mean, that's kind of an 8x10-ish, picture, or maybe a 2x3. Does that do better? And the answer is maybe. Well, I could do it again and make a smaller picture. I think I like that better. And then I looked at this. Maybe what I looked here is looked up here, and I spent a lot of trouble getting those clouds in there, and I've lost them. So what I did is I pushed the image up a little bit to try and get more clouds, and then I made a mask to make it as an 8x10. And I think that is a nice portrait of this fellow. What do you think?
I like that.
What's nice, I like, is there's a bit of space on the right-hand side.
Yep.
He's kind of tilted a bit to the right, so it gives him space to tilt into.
Good catch. All right. Well,
I like that.
So the next thing then to do is to finish locking in. And I have shared with you my favorite of making a vignette. So let me go through it with you one more time.
Yeah, vignette.
So I'm up here at the top of sizing. I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer. And I'm going to take my lasso tool, and I'm going to drag a lasso around what I think is the most important part of the photograph. Bango. That's kind of an organic shape. I'm going to get rid of the mask that was there. I'm just going to delete that sucker. So I've got that, and I'm going to put a new, lighten that area up a little bit. So lighten the entire picture. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a mask on there. So I'm only lightening his face. And I can adjust that lightness, but before I do that, I could feather it here, but I prefer to feather it using a Gaussian blur. And I set the number to about what the megapixel on the camera is. This guy took this with a cell phone, so I'm going to guess it's probably in here somewhere. So I'm going to click OK. And if you look, let me turn it on so you can see it. See the mask? I made that feathered edge there. Now, if I look at this thing, I can say, well, that probably is too light. So I can double click back on the curve, and I can bring that curve down a little bit. So I like that. I can also change its opacity. So now I've got your attention on the face. The next part of this procedure is to make the darker part. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take the lasso tool again and say, well, what are the least important parts? Well, to my mind, all that stuff in there is pretty much unimportant. So I'm going to put in another curve. Okay. So let the curve come through the face, but not the other. So I want to reverse this mask. That's Command Control I. And now what I want to do is go back here, and I want to darken that a little bit. So that darkens it out. But you can tell, I mean, there's nothing subtle about that arrangement. So I'm going to come back up here to filter. Sorry, get back on the mask, go back up here to filter. It saved the Gaussian blur that I just did. So I'm just going to apply that again. Apply that there. And now that line went away. So let's look at that again. So what happens is I have light on him, which I can change. Let's go back to this one and say that was probably too much. I can lower it here. See it? So there's the light, just a little bit more light on his face. There's the dark in the background, but you couldn't see it. But now you don't see that glare off of his shirt at all. And the building, because we blurred that out and made it darker. So that's not important at all, nor is this piece of the sail. So now we have a portrait, which I think we can be pretty fond of or proud of. So let me get back.
Do you think that upper left-hand corner should still be a touch darker?
And I can do that.
The sky is still quite bright, as is his face.
Well, we could do that, but remember that was the cloud in the back.
Yeah.
So we might try changing that, or maybe making his face lighter again. When we go back here, if we look at our curve here, you see that's not on that upper corner. So what I could do here is I could take this curve, and all I did was double click on the curve itself, and maybe move it up a little bit more. And then here where we had it dark, which is this one here, go on this thing and maybe make it, grab dark here. Maybe make that part darker.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, and that's where we can make those adjustments here.
Yeah,
with our mask. So now we have a picture that's pretty neat. I think it's a heck of a lot better than what we started out with. Let's go back and remember what that looked like. Go down my alternate or option key, click on it. That's what he looked like. That's much more of a character.
Yeah, I'll say.
Okay,
same guy.
Richard, I'm curious, Richard.
Yeah.
There's a story here and I want to know it.
The story is I don't know the story. It's not my photograph.
So you don't know, is he a boat builder?
The fellow told me that he had built this boat that he was standing in front of. And he was a character, and that's why the guy snapped the picture. And I want to say, I think he snapped it with his phone.
And you know where it was taken?
No, but I can find out.
It's just got a cool. I just think the guy's got a cool story. It's a really great photograph.
Yeah,
I'm sure it does too.
You did an awesome job. Yeah, a lot of character there.
Character.
Just curious.
Yeah, a lot of character.
That's the trick, So the reality is that there was a lot of steps there, but none of them were hard. The number was overwhelming.
Yeah.
But the steps themselves were smaller, and part of this is deciding where you want to go. What's that Chinese proverbs? A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
One single step, yeah.
So
we'll just look at the recording. Thank you.
There was a tool that I gave you before, and maybe when I do the recording, I'll superimpose a little piece of it where I showed you how to make color maps of where you wanted to do your work. Remember that, where we said, I want to brighten this part, I want to get rid of the dunce cap, I want to make his hand fit better. So it's figuring out ahead of time where you want to go. The rule of thumb that I'm the biggest fan of is, once you think you know where you want to go, is to fix the camera or fix the image with whatever bothers you the most. Whatever's the most troublesome, fix it. And then go to the next thing that is the most troublesome. Every image has its own workflow because every image is different. And if I were to do this tomorrow, the workflow would not be the same. Because something else would bother me, or I'd have some new great idea, or I might decide that the boat is really, really important and want to emphasize it more when someone tells me the story. So that's what we can do. So great tools to do that with. Just don't let them overwhelm you.
You talked about dealing with the things that bother you the most.
Yep.
And I remember she asked me, what's the difference between taking a picture of a mannequin and a real person? The eyes on the mannequin will be dead flat, whereas the live person's going to have a little bit of a glisten in the eye. And this guy had pits for his eye, and it was like can we do anything to lighten up that eyeball?
We can.
Remember, in Photoshop, impossible is only an opinion. So of course we can add eyes. Let's look at one way to do it. This is the picture as we finished it off. He's got eyes. Perhaps we could have made that a little bit more realistic, but let's see how I did it. So let's open this up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, for our purposes right now, I'm going to turn off these bits. So here I've got a color image, and it's the same one that I saved here in this stamped visible. I'm going to come in here, take my marquee tool, and I'm just going to grab his eyes, because that's really all I need to worry about. So there's his eyes. Command or Control, C to copy it, V to paste it. And right here, I have a layer with just his eyes. I'm going to click on that layer. And because I want to be able to adjust it later, I'm going to turn it into a smart object. We can do that a couple of ways. We can right-click on the open space here, and we can go here to convert to a smart object. Or we can come up here to filter a smart object. There we go, a smart object here. Either place, it does the same job. Okay, so now it's a smart object. While I'm on this layer, what I want to do is open the eyes. I'm going to come back up here to filter. I'm going to use liquify. And there's our image right there. We can make this window a little bit bigger. And we can use the magnifying glass to, that's probably good enough. I can really see what I'm doing. So what I want to do is open his eyes, but I want everything else to stay the same. So the trick here is to freeze the part. That's this button here. It says freeze to mask. And I'm simply going to paint over to protect those parts of the image that I do not want anything here to impact on. I'm going to keep his eyebrows protected. And this hair over here. And these wrinkles right in here. If I got a little rambunctious here, like I did over here, I just hold down the Alt key, and I'm just going to let myself have access to that. So the Alt key changes it from a plus to a minus. Now here, I want to bring that back. All right, so those parts are protected. As I move other things around, those aren't going to change. So what do I want to do? I want to make the eyes more open. I can use this move tool here, click on it. I'm going to make this circle a little bit larger. I'll use the right bracket key to make it bigger. Let's see if I can lower that bottom. And like anything else, this is a place you're going to need some practice. And then here, if I could just open that a little bit more. All right, so I've opened those. I think that's okay. I'm just going to say okay. And it's going to come in here and it's going to give me a layer underneath this adjustment layer that we made. And you can see now that his eyes are open. Well, you're going to want to say, well, gee, I want to see the whites of his eyes. And how are we going to do that? Easiest way is to probably come in here and paint something. So I'm going to come in here and create a new layer. So that's a new layer on top of what I've been doing. I'm working on that on this adjustment layer. What I'm going to do in here is make my brush white, zoom in a little bit more, take my paintbrush with white paint, got a round brush here. For now, let's make it hard, and let's make it a lot smaller yet. Maybe smaller even than that, very small. Let's zoom in a little bit more. So what I'd like to do is add some more white in here. Paintbrush. A little white there. Maybe a little white there. Over here, the same thing. There is no white in here. So let's give myself some white here and some white right here. I'll take this layer. This is the paint layer. I'm going to bring the opacity down so I can see through the white. Okay. So on this layer, I'm going to create a mask just down here to the rectangle with a circle in it. It's a white mask. I'm going to come in here now with black paint. And I'm going to clean up this bit here. Make sure that your opacity is at 100, your flow is at 100. Make sure we're on the mask with black paint. I'm going to ease that up a little bit. Over here, down, and down, and over here, maybe there, maybe that way. Yeah, if I wanted to spend time, we could probably do better, but that's going to get the job done, I think. So now we've got some whites in his eyes. I can go back on the painting layer here, and I can change its opacity. Well, let's try it there. Okay. Let's zoom out a little bit. Well, that kind of looks like it should be something out of a movie. So I've got that layer obviously much too bright. So I'm still on this layer here. Come back up to opacity, and let's lower that down. Doesn't take much, does it? Right about there. I'm going to take these two layers. So this one, I'm going to hold down my command button and grab layer 1 as well. I'm going to right click on the side here, and I'm going to turn these into a group from layers. And I'm going to call it white eyes. So here it is, white eyes, on, off, on, off, on. And now let's go ahead and put our other layers back on. So come down here to my eyes again, wise eyes. Maybe we just need to reduce those down a little bit more. So I'm going to reduce the entire group here. Come up here, take its opacity, and bring it down just a tad. I think I like that. So eyes open, eyes shut, open, shut, open, shut. Thanks. Good question.